So if everyone could take their seats, we're going to get started. Thank you.
Thank you for coming to the Harvard Kennedy School. And I also want to welcome those who were not able to make it in person but have joined us online. This is the 4th annual Emerging School Models Conference that we've held in this exact space, though it's a little larger than the ones we've held in the past, so we're going to spill over into some adjacent spaces as the afternoon wears on. I'm the director of the program on education policy and governance here at the Harvard Kennedy School. I want to begin by taking note of the fact that 100 years ago, the Supreme Court in Pierce v. the Society of Sisters of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary enunciated a principle basic to this conference. The court said, "The child is not the mere creature of the state. Those who nurture him and direct his destiny have the right, coupled with a high duty, to recognize and prepare him for additional obligations." The court struck down an Oregon law that required all children to be educated at a public school. This was a denial of liberty, said the Supreme Court in 1925. It is the family, not the state, that has the right and duty to direct the education of children. Over the next 100 years, the Supreme Court has extended that principle in several directions. In 1973, the court in Yoder said that children could be educated at home. And as a result, statutes in every state were enacted protecting that right. Though the Supreme Court has never enunciated that principle in general for all groups, they've limited it to a particular religious group. But in 2002, the Supreme Court in Zellman said that parents could use school vouchers to send their children to private religious schools. And since then, school choice programs, including charter schools, tax credit programs, education savings accounts, and public school choice portfolio schools, magnet schools, a wide range of opportunities have opened up in all sectors. And as choice has expanded, innovation has occurred. And this conference is intended to provide a big tent where we can discuss all forms of choice without necessarily saying one form of choice is to be preferred over another, but to embrace all as opportunities to discover what is the best way to educate our children. And perhaps there is no one best way. Perhaps the variety of ways that are out there is what we need as a country going forward. We're very grateful that the conference that we've scheduled this year has been able to build on the successes that we've had in the past, and that the number of registrations has reached an all-time high with 600 people registered for in-person. I don't think they're all going to arrive on the scene. I hope not, because I don't know what we would do with them all. But there will be, if everybody attends who's registered, another 1,500 people watching the conference online, and it will be recorded for distribution via the network or the website that we have here at the Program on Education Policy and Governance downstream. So over the next 2 days, you're going to hear from an exceptional lineup of researchers, policymakers, and lawmakers, and parents. So we will have a wide variety of presentations from different perspectives. We're also fortunate to have this evening Jeff and Janine Yass, the founders of the Yass Prize, present with us. They will deliver the keynote address at the Charles Hotel, And I hope that you're all registered for dinner over there and can join us for that occasion and for the reception that will precede it. And then tomorrow morning, we're going to begin with a conversation with Superintendent Alberto Carvalho at the Los Angeles County Unified School District, and Melanie Lundquist, co-founder of the Partnership for Los Angeles Public Schools, to see how innovation is taking place in the public sector context. So I could not do this without the help of the full resources of the PEPG team. So I want to thank Michael Poor and Nick Tavares, and where's Antonio Wentland?
He's over there.
Antonio Wentland, do you have anything you want to say to the group?
Sure. I'll speak really loudly. We have a really big crowd. We didn't want to say no to anybody, so please bear with us, be patient. Read the agenda. Figure out where you want to be as we move from panels. A, B, C is downstairs. The end of this corridor is one staircase. Come out, take a right, straight, you're there. But then you have to come back. All the food, all the coffee is here. There is an elevator. If you need it, please use it. Otherwise, it's just one flight of stairs. It's quicker if you just go up and down. It's important that you really pay attention to where you want to be so that we can keep this on time. Otherwise, please enjoy yourself.
All right. I could not do this without the help of Daniel Hamlin, who's the presidential professor of education policy at the University of Oklahoma and was here as a postdoctoral fellow some years ago. And so we take a lot of pride in the fact that we were able to place one of our postdoctoral fellows into a position where he has become a major player in the education policy discussions in his part of the country. So he's helped to plan and organize the conference, and he's identified somebody he's going to introduce to our online audience who's going to keep the discussion moving as we move from one room to another between sessions. So Daniel, would you please do that as part of your presentation? I'm going to turn the podium over to you now to move things into our first panel.
Okay. I'll make it brief. All right. Well, of course, thank you, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here again. I feel like every time we hold this conference, I come away with a much keener awareness of some of the most important innovations that are happening all over the country, and always feel like the conference really stretches my thinking. So it's really good to be here. And of course, I'm excited to say we've expanded again. So we're going to be covering a lot more topics this year. We'll be introducing many new voices as well. I think we have 66 panelists and moderators this year, which is about double what we had compared to last year. So I think that's really exciting. And let me just quickly say a word about the design of the conference and the sessions. If you've been with us before, you'll know that we try to combine perspectives from research, policy, and practice. And we're going to continue doing that this year as well. And of course, Antonio mentioned the one key logistical change that I will reiterate. Look at the programs and make sure you give yourself a little bit of time to move to the session that you want to attend. This is Allison here in the program. Nye is just right there across the hall. And then there are this is Nye, pardon me. Okay, see? It's been a while since I was a postdoc here. This is Nye, that's Allison, and downstairs is Elwood. And there's a series of signs, and there'll be individuals out there to guide you. But you do want to, I know we have some great conversations that go on in the hallway. Just make sure you reserve a little bit of time so you can get over to your sessions. Our sessions are going to run in the following way. So the panelists, each of them will have about 8 to 10 minutes to give their opening remarks. And then from there, the moderators will maybe ask 1 or 2 questions of their own, and the rest of the time is reserved for audience Q&A, which We think that's really the hallmark of this conference. There's a lot of great people here in attendance, and we, of course, want to hear from you and hear what you're thinking about. We're going to have microphones. 2 microphones will be floating around this room. I think Drew in the back is going to have one, and maybe Antonio will have another. So if you want to get involved in the conversation, find a mic. That's the way to do it. Paul and I will kind of call attention to you if you hold up your hand. Okay, why don't we jump into our first session. It's titled The Next Frontier of School Choice. Which form of school choice will lead the way? Our first panelist is Eric Paisner. He's Chief Operating Officer for the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. And then we have Don Soifer, who needs no introduction. He's Chief Executive Officer of the National Microschooling Center. And of course, Daniel Weisberg, former Deputy Chancellor of New York City Public Schools. So I think, Eric, you're the first one in the program, so I'll let you go ahead and take it away first, if that's okay.
Sure. Lucky me. Maybe alphabetically or just where I sat, but in any case, hi everybody. Thanks. It's great to be with you. So the question is how are charter schools going to lead the way in choice going forward? And I think there are 4 reasons that I see for why charter schools will continue to be a leader in choice here. The first is that parents continue to demand charter schools all across the country. At the National Alliance of Public Charter Schools, where I work, the last time we did a survey a couple years ago, we found across the country that 74% of parents would consider a charter school if they could send their child to one for a variety of reasons. And that 77% of parents actually want more charter schools in their area. In general, just want more choice. So demand is there. And demand is there even as we see a significant increase in other types of choice beyond charter schools, obviously. We took a look at some data recently put out by EdChoice and also looked at enrollment data in charter schools across the country. And what we noticed is that across the country, as more choice options came on the table, enrollment in charter schools, even in states where significant ESAs and others were available, continued to increase. So when there is demand for choice, when people are learning more about the different kinds of choices that exist out there, they know about charter schools. Charters have been around for 30 years. They know they're high quality options in many cases. Parents are still continuing to demand them. They see the buildings. They know that they could be good options for their children. And again, so just more choice also continues to lead to charter schools. They can be easier choices for parents too, as they know about them. The second reason why I think charters will continue to lead is that the policy design for charters, the underpinnings for charter schools is still strong. It's still smart reform. The idea that when you open up a charter school, when you're given the ability to open a charter school in a community, in the next year or so, there is an opportunity for kids that can enroll, whether it's 50 or 100 or 300 over some period of time. That school then exists. And the funding that follows is automatic. That's a really important and critical lever for why charter schools can operate and continue to be sort of efficient as we think about growth. Just in this last year, there was a big case that went to the Supreme Court about the question about charter schools. It was out of Oklahoma, St. Isidore School, and it came down to, at the Supreme Court, sort of a question of, are charter schools sort of fundamentally public or private? But ultimately, that issue is separate from this, but I believe that one of the reasons why a group that wanted to start a religious charter school is that the idea is that when the school would open, the funds would follow. So the policy mechanism for dollars to follow did exist, and it remains an attractive reason for schools to be open. And that's, additionally, the fact that charter schools are public is something that's attractive to parents that want to send their children to a public school of choice, and also attractive from a policy perspective. It's part of the reason why charter schools have remained, in many places, bipartisan. As public schools, they have been attractive to individuals both on the left and the right. And we see survey research, for whatever reason, people still have faith in public schools as critical institutions in our communities, and charter schools are a part of that. The third reason why I think charters are going to continue to move forward in a positive way is that the policy opportunities right now in the country for charter schools are very, very positive. First, starting at the federal level, The charter school program, which is the funding mechanism that allows for the startup of new charter schools and the replication and expansion of high-performing charter schools, it is funded at the highest level it's ever been funded just this year from Congress and the administration at $500 million on an annual basis. And the amount of money specifically devoted for replication and expansion of high-performing schools is also the highest that it's ever been. So coming from the federal government, what you're seeing is the continued incentives to allow for growth. And we see that when those incentives exist, then growth follows across the country. We're also seeing a little bit of deregulation of charter schools across the country in some states, which also is going to allow for growth. For example, in Florida, you're seeing additional focus on schools of hope, which allows for charter schools to get created more easily in communities where schools are not doing that well. We're seeing additional support for charter schools in other ways too. In Texas, additional facilities legislation, similar types of things in Nevada and Illinois. So additional support in states for the growth and support of charter schools. And then the last reason is that the growth in charter schools continues to exist. It has existed for many, many years. But over the last 5 years, we've seen 15% increase total in the number of students in charter schools across the country. So even though some of the stories you hear talk about, well, the growth, a slowdown in the growth of charter schools, it's really not the case. Charter schools are growing in many places across the country. So it's about 15% over the last 5 years. In nearly every state, you're still seeing growth. Just this last year, through the last school year, 104,000 new students in charter schools across the country. And that's contrasted with what we see as about a $200,000 drop in the number of students in district-run public schools across the country. So you're seeing some movement there from district-run charter schools to charter schools, and a growth in the number of students that are attending across different demographics as well. We've seen over those same 5 years a growth of 22% in the number of Hispanic students in charter schools, so a big growth demographic there as well. So as our population is growing, the parts that it's growing also, we're seeing that growth in charter schools as well. And just in a few states, Idaho has seen nearly 70% growth in the number of students in charter schools over 5 years. South Carolina, 57%. Washington State, which doesn't have a huge number of charter schools, but still 50% growth over 5 years. And Texas, which I think is now the second largest number of, has the second largest number of students in charter schools, has had a 30% growth in the number of students in charter schools over 5 years. And Nevada, 25%. So you're seeing growth in a number of states, but also across the country. So the combination of the parent demand, the strong underpinnings of the policy in charters, the improving policy environment in Washington and across the country, and just continued growth in enrollment, all those things put together, I think suggest that charter schools will continue to be viable options for families across the country, and we're going to see continued growth in the future.
Hi, I'm Don Soifer. I'm the CEO of the National Microschooling Center. First, let me just, Professor Peterson, Professor Hamlin, Antonio, what you've built here from the first session is, it's not the first institution that you've put on the map, but you've really created an institution, and thank you, this is wonderful. I don't need to use my slide deck, but there is one, if I can just talk. There are lots of other places in the room that you can look besides my beautiful face. And there'll be happy to share slides. Great, okay. So today's microschooling movement, innovative small learning environments, is completely different than our broader schools of choice experience in the United States, any number of different ways. Microschools are carving out new ways of educating in models that wouldn't be viable or available in so many of the communities that this early adoption movement serves. And families are, in all cases, active partners in their children's learning. Do I have that control, or does somebody else? Great, okay, well, I'll just talk. We really see, and I'm going to, So there is research that you're going to see. It's from the National Microschooling Center's 2025 sector analysis. It's the broadest research to date on the sector. 800 microschools in all 50 states participated. So the data that you're going to see is from there, and it's free and online. I did want to just start, for those that may not be familiar, we really see 3 different paths, types of microschools around the country. The first ones are independents that are, what a lot of people might expect. Many of us during the pandemic shutdowns came to reevaluate our relationships with the institutions that we had historically relied upon to meet our families' education needs, and the microschooling movement, although a lot of it is not very new at all, right? Since slate blackboards came across the prairies on trains, multi-age classrooms, and reporters will ask, where was the first microschool? And I say, I don't know, the Book of Judges maybe, but that feels very Western-centric. But that's what we're talking about. Second of all is partnership microschools. We have partnership microschools around the country where the technical partner is responsible for teaching and learning, working with host partners, Goodwill in Arizona. We have a terrific partnership microschool coming in southern Ohio with the YMCAs. The microschool that we ourselves ran was a partnership with a city government in a county-run school district that gave us access to the rec centers and libraries and city resources totally outside of the county district-operated resources to run microschools. And employer microschools or houses of worship make great partnerships. And lastly, provider networks. They're a fast-growing, important part of the sector. There are terrific different provider networks that provide very different strengths, value propositions, costs, and are really, with the support of 7-figure support from venture capital, are really growing. And again, microschooling is so much about changing what is possible, and provider networks are driving that. Okay, I'm going to get a little bit into the data. So of microschool founders, based on the most recent survey, more than half of microschool founders are currently or formerly licensed public school educators. About half have their own child in their microschool when they begin it. About a third are professional educators who are unlicensed. Maybe they're Montessori, maybe they're early childhood. And 1 in 7 are none of the above. I'll keep talking. Wait, now I'm back. Great. I'm going to just touch on some of the data. There's so many of these, but I just sort of drew out the ones that might be most useful. Microschools are affordable for working families. We see a median of $6,500 when we talk about how much it costs to serve one kid a year in your microschool. And 48% of microschools have a yearly tuition fees between $5,000 and $10,000, and you can see the other range there. So again, the ways that microschooling is just different. So this is in the early adoption phase. If you believe I think the best research to date says we're maybe at a strong 2% market share of families who rely on microschooling as their primary source of education for their kids. So in the early adoption phase. Let me just ask, how many, if you're a microschool founder, could you raise your hand? There's some really wonderful ones in this room. Awesome, awesome. Thank you for being here, right? It's during the school day. It's expensive to be here. And we're going to feel like there's a lot of people, including probably half of this room, that kind of wishes we were something other than we are, right? That's pressure that we're going to see. But you guys lead fantastic microschools. I've been, and you are the lifeblood of this movement and the work that you're leading, not just at your own microschool, but as a movement. That's why I'm here. That's why we're here. Some of the ways that, so microschools you'll learn are, there's a great story in the 74 this morning about, that you'll hear more about at tomorrow's session from the RAND Corporation. How do we track impact? How do we, again, one of the ways that lots of people wish microschools were something different than they are, microschools, so many of them are very, very good at tracking their impact in ways that matter to their core stakeholders, which is their families. And we can talk a little bit more about that if you like. Number two, I like to say, within the microschooling sector, dynamism is the new sustainability. So microschooling, if you think about it this way, is about moving the business of schooling out of 50-year-old buildings that cost $50 million, which are about the average in this country, into just a way that feels a whole lot more like the new economy that's already here, and the economy that we're preparing kids to succeed within, and not the economy that we were being prepared for when we sat in those kids' seats. And often the ways that it's different need to translate in lots of ways, so that as lenders, as philanthropy looks at business models, we all need to understand that this is just fundamentally different. And then last, again, you saw the numbers, $6,500 is the median for the amount of money a microschool spends to educate a particular kid. So in terms of the productivity of a sector, I would suggest that depending on what the affordability and what the effectiveness are, the productivity of the microschooling sector is something we can all maybe learn a little bit from. What are some of the ways that microschools demonstrate impact? And they were allowed to pick multiple answers here, but I think this is one of a couple slides that gets at something close to the heart of this conference. Observation-based reports, and I'll just sort of read off, I'll let you look at the numbers. Portfolios, tracking mastery. Only 29% of microschools say they give regular letter grades, which is interesting. Results from embedded assessments and learning tools. When we worked with the RAND Corporation on showing our longitudinal growth of individual kids over time, which is back in the days when I was a charter school authorizer, the only indicator that I especially cared about, there are different ways of doing that that are cost effective and embedded within world-class learning tools in this golden age of digital content. Tracking non-academic learning, so many families in microschools care a lot more about things other than even academic growth, let alone academic mastery. Administering surveys with parents at least twice each school year. Administering dedicated norm reference assessments or criterion referenced assessments. Again, that story in the 74 has a lot to tell. Surveys of parents and surveys of kids. And then lastly, making norm referenced assessments available to families if they want to opt in. And it's interesting, the pattern that seems consistent is about half of the families choose to opt in when that's available. When we asked microschool founders, what are your most desired outcomes of your microschool? These are the answers that they gave us. This one is weighted, so they can choose multiple ones. Academic growth, growth in non-academic learning, child's happiness in their new setting, academic proficiency and mastery, skills perceived as necessary for the future, and finally, faith or values-rooted outcomes. A lot of this conversation here is about choice, and it's crucial that even then, when we have choice programs that a lot of people get excited about, it's crucial that the details of policies matter, and it's crucial that the details of the choice program not constrain innovation. It's the flexibilities that really drive why families choose the microschool that they are in, and their ability to. You really can operate and design a microschool around the specific needs of the particular kids that you're serving. And if you know kids, those needs change. And being able to have the flexibility to run a microschool in that way moving forward is powerful. The multiple meaningful measures of impact and those crucial flexibilities. Let me just give you a couple quick other slides that I think might inform, and then I'm happy to yield the floor, but I think a couple things that sort of get this conversation going. Microschools, about the families that attend microschools, right? So in terms of the income of the households that kids are from, about half are at the average income for their area. 40% of families served by microschools are below, either slightly below or significantly below the average income for their area, and only 12% are above. So, for those that maybe in the early days of the pandemic shutdowns, when you read the New York press and talked about these pandemic pods as ways of, dishing out privilege, and are these things any good, and are these things equitable, I think we see in the microschooling sector something that's very, very satisfying to me. And then the last information point and then I'll step aside is, where are kids coming from microschools? More than anything else, kids are coming to microschools from district-operated public schools, more than 2 in 5. Homeschooling comes right behind that, followed by less than 10% of kids that are coming to microschools from private schools or public charter schools. So these are families that probably had never identified as non-traditional learning families in any way, and they're driving a movement. So with that, I yield and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Eric. And Don, tough acts to follow. Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Weisberg, late of the New York City Public Schools, First Deputy Chancellor. So you're getting me unshackled by any allegiance to any particular administration. Probably Dan and Paul put me on here, so I would say choice is bad. Get sparks really flying. To hell with charter schools, but that's not actually what I feel. I'm very supportive of charter schools, of microschools, of innovative models that are in or outside the traditional school systems. And that's not, I would say I'm probably in the same boat with the parents that both of you are talking about, in that that's not because I have any ideological allegiance to a particular model. It's because I think it's incumbent on all of us as educators to attack what I think our biggest problem is. Oh, we don't need to do this. This was for Paul's undergrads. Although we can do that in a later session if anybody's really having trouble sleeping. But AI, wow, who's talking about that? So, and that is the big problem is scarcity. There's a reason why so many parents are flocking to charters from traditional district schools or to a microschool or other innovative models, or homeschooling for that matter, that I know we have sessions on from other types of schools. They're not getting what they want. And so that's certainly true where I come from in New York City. The thing I would say, though, maybe slightly provocative just based on my years in education reform, those who are interested, as I am, in expanding choice, we will ignore the health of traditional districts and district schools at our peril. There is a reason politically why we have charter caps in New York and California that aren't going away anytime soon. And that is because the concern, whether it is well-founded or not, doesn't matter what the data say in this respect, the concern that charters are somehow harming traditional districts and district schools. Parents do not want that, including parents who have opted out of traditional district schools. They do not want to see the schools that they attended, their parents and grandparents attended, go downhill. They don't want to see that if they attended parochial schools. So we ought to all care about, for example, Catholic schools and other parochial schools. I certainly am concerned about what I'm seeing in New York, where those networks of schools that are really important neighborhood institutions, in many cases, are really struggling. The one thing I will say is, in some ways, we're all going to succeed together, or we're going to fail together. We have to figure out how the ecosystem works. I want to just touch on a couple of things that hopefully open up some interesting questions and discussion. We did something in New York City a couple of years ago I don't think we've ever done, and that is we survey parents every year. We have the biggest everything. Sorry, guys. But we have the biggest parent, student, teacher survey in the country. We do that every year. But I want to do something a little different, so I raised a little bit of money, and we surveyed the parents who had opted out of New York City public schools. And that meant they had one of their kids in New York City public schools and moved their kids to a charter. It meant they left New York City altogether. It meant that they investigated whether they wanted to place their child in a district 3K program and then decided not to and went to a private school. We really wanted to get under the hood. What was driving the decisions of these parents who decided that our schools were not giving them what they wanted? And by the way, I put this, happy to send you guys the link. You can distribute it. We made it public. It's on our website. It was fascinating. We also did 21 focus groups with this set of parents, and I was able to observe a bunch of them. And, there's a lot of data. It's worthy of a longer discussion, but the couple of things that came out of it as strong themes of what they were looking for that in this case, this group of parents were not getting or felt that they were not getting was safety and rigor. Now, that meant different things to different parents. So safety wasn't, for a lot of parents, wasn't that I thought my local elementary school, kids were getting harmed and there were fights all the time. Not necessarily. Might have been that the school was too far away. I was worried about my kid getting home from middle school. Might have been that my perception is that the school was somewhat more crowded and disorganized. And I just wasn't comfortable with my child in that situation. And similarly, rigor. Rigor did not mean the same thing to all parents, but it kept coming out. So it meant things like high graduation and college matriculation rates. It meant rigorous curricula. It meant high quality teachers and principals. So this is what parents were looking for over and over again. And the ones who find it, many parents in New York City do find it in the traditional district schools, they're very satisfied. The ones who don't opt out, and they should. I'm glad that they had other choices. One other thing I'll just mention quickly that to me was a stunning thing. Again, we were surveying a bunch of parents who moved out of New York City altogether, and we asked them why they moved out. What I expected to see was the biggest driver by far was housing costs, which are a huge problem in New York City as they are here, many other places. And cost of living was a driver, but for 82% of the parents who left New York City, schools were an important factor. And I just throw that out there. Parents, we all know this. Parents will walk through fire to find the right school for their child. So choice is a really good thing. We want to give that choice locally as much as we can. So think about that. We could have held on to these New Yorkers if we had provided them better school choices. They felt they couldn't find it, and that was one of the reasons. They moved to the suburbs, they moved down south, they moved to California, wherever. So how do we think about choice in the district setting? It really, we are looking to fill gaps, scarcity gaps. So in New York City, we have any New Yorkers here? Please, somebody say, all right, a couple, not many. Let's go Mets. Don admitted to me that he's a Met fan. Very, very dark days, very dark days. Be nice to us for Met fans. So there's a lot of sturm and drang around specialized high schools in New York City. Some of you may have read about this. So I went to one of these. They've been around for a long time. By law, these 8 high schools, in order to get in, there was one criterion. You have to take a standardized test. That's what determines kids are rank ordered, and the top kids above the cut score get in. These are great schools. These are very high demand schools. About 40% of our rising 8th graders take the specialized high school test. They want to go to these schools, but they're 8 schools, and folks, we have almost 400 high schools, right? So all the attention is on these specialized high schools. And again, we were looking at what are parents looking for. They're looking for safety and rigor, and they're looking for it close to home. And so one of the things we did is use our new schools potential. We have the opportunity, the state generally is pretty cooperative with us, to open new innovative models within the school district where is really important. And so one of the things we did was open up Bard Early College High School Bronx in the South Bronx. And what we did, maybe this is anti-choice, we imposed a preference for admission for kids from the South Bronx first, and then kids for the rest of the Bronx, and then for the other 4 boroughs. Huge demand. We had people who said, well, are there really going to be that many kids from the South Bronx who want to go to an elite early college high school, because Bard runs they already have a couple early college schools in New York City. And I said, just watch. We got about 8x the number of applications that we had spots the first year from kids in those districts in the South Bronx. So filling gaps and scarcity, those kids shouldn't have to get on a train and a bus and go, you know, a long ways with their parents worrying about them, you know, getting to and from in order to get a top quality, rigorous education. I'll give you just a couple other examples, and then I will stop. You know, we have more and more students who are diagnosed with learning disabilities, and specifically with dyslexia and other print-based disabilities. And these students, of course, have every potential to excel at extremely high level. They need particular supports in order to learn how to read well. We're doing better in providing those in our regular neighborhood schools, but some students really require more. We opened a couple of schools in central Brooklyn and again the South Bronx. Not the Upper East Side, not Brownstone, Brooklyn, for those of you who know New York City, specifically for these students starting in second grade, because that's when the needs become apparent. Again, huge explosion in demand for that. We also opened up at the high school level a bunch of career-focused high schools. We partnered with the private sector and the nonprofit sector. We have a partnership with Northwell Health, which is the biggest healthcare system in New York, to open a brand new high school where, long story short, every kid going to that high school is going to end up with an opportunity to get a paid internship in the healthcare field with Northwell, and very, very likely is going to get a job offer for a good paying entry-level job when they graduate high school, if they choose to go into the workforce right after high school. Again, rigor, safety, close to home. So, and there is every opportunity to continue to provide those innovative models within the district, traditional district system. At the same time, we want to make sure we're supporting those models outside the system.
All right. Dan, this gives me the opportunity to mention a study that has recently been released, which took a look at the 1 million different credentialing programs that exist in the United States. And they point out that there are some extraordinarily fine credentialing programs where if you go get a credential, it gets you an opportunity to either move into an occupation or to move up within an occupation and to earn more money. But they found that on average, it really didn't, if you compared them to similar young people who looked the same in many demographic ways, there was no value added to the credential. So the question I'm asking for you is, when you're putting together this kind of career preparation program, how do you make sure that this is a credential that's really going to be of value to that student and not just you know, another program that doesn't really have an impact?
It's a great question, and it's a challenge, but luckily it's one you can overcome with, frankly, just analysis. So we are fortunate in New York City Public Schools that we have the wherewithal in-house to do that kind of workforce analysis, because Paul's 100% right. There's a blizzard of credentials that kids can get even in high school. Some of them don't lead to jobs, period. Some of them lead to jobs, but they are low-paying jobs, not what we're interested in. We are about economic security, generational wealth. Some of them lead to jobs that are decent paying, but they're dead end. They don't then lead to higher paying jobs. And so what we had to do was map all of that and make sure that when we were offering credential programs as part of our pathways, that these were credentials that led to good paying entry-level jobs that then led to higher paying jobs. And one of the things you find, for example, with Northwell does tuition assistance. So we have kids now, this year, who graduated last year, working for Northwell, using the credential that they got as, say, as an example, medical imaging technicians making $68,000 a year, but they are getting tuition assistance, so they're going back to college, because if they get an associate's degree, now they're making 98, they get a 4-year degree, they're now making 6 figures. So you have to do that research. By the way, plug for Mesa Charter, a great charter network, small network in New York City that does terrific career pathways work at the high school level.
Okay, I'll have a quick question here, and then we'll open up Q&A to the audience. Don, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you feel are the keys to sustainability. When I have an opportunity to look at Microschool financials, those are some pretty thin margins. You could lose 2 students in any given year and suddenly be out of business. I've seen some recent data suggesting that maybe something like 35 to 40% of operators don't even take a salary themselves. So how are you thinking about sustainability?
I think it's really important to think about this is a fundamentally different experience than the broader schools of choice experience. If you have your own children and you start a microschool that serves 10 kids, the median size of a non-public microschool is 22 kids. And you operate a great microschool and make a difference in kids' lives for 5 years, and then you go on and do something else with your life, you have not failed. You have done something worthwhile. And it's different, if your hardware store goes out of business because you sold widgets for $1 or too high, that's one thing. But the dynamism that we see in the microschooling sector, we have microschool founders that move to a different state. Maybe I live in Nevada. The state to the south of us has ESA programs that many microschool founders will then move to. Maybe your own kids get older and you want to start they'll start a new microschool. So many microschool founders are experienced educators that we try to catch before they leave the profession, but maybe after they leave the classroom. I don't know. I mean, we get calls from educators who say, Don, this was the first time I've eaten lunch 5 days a week, right? And it's about, there's so many other factors that I think we need to fundamentally, microschools are mostly operated in commercial spaces with commercial 3-year leases. I think we just really need to rethink what sustainability means in this sector as a sector and challenge our assumptions. Doesn't answer your question at all.
Well, maybe it's a good time to open it up for Q&A. I think, Drew, you've got a mic. Yeah, Don Parker.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for each of you for being here, and more than that, thank you for all that you do. I have tremendous respect and affection for anybody that puts their shoulder to this boulder. But I'm going to come over to Eric because my experience is largely in charter schools, and I have 2 questions if I could. The first is, as an operator of a charter school, if ESAs become the prevalent school choice mechanism, why would I operate a charter school if I can access the public funds through an ESA? That's 1. 2, you described the migration of students from the traditional public schools to charter schools, which creates a surplus of infrastructure in one system, building infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, food service infrastructure, and a demand for infrastructure on the other side. My experience is we're not very good at allocating this taxpayer-funded infrastructure where it's needed. And my question to you is, have we made any progress on that issue?
Yeah, these are big and good questions. So starting with the second one about infrastructure, I mean, part of what we've seen, and I'm sure you've seen this, is that as charter schools have grown, we've seen some management organizations that have created to replicate some of the items that districts have done well to provide services on behalf of their students, or at least done efficiently in lots of places, whether it's transportation, serving students with special needs. So you see some of that, whereas schools grow, they are looking for those opportunities and figuring out how to do it in sort of in a smart way. But I don't think that it's solved by and large, even though there are 8,000 charter schools, a little more than 8,000 charter schools across the country. You do have independent operators and those that are starting schools and figuring out lots of things on their own in a way to serve their, the populations that are coming to them. So in a way, like microschools, I mean, they're also dynamic environments too. So even though now charter schools are large, being 8,000 across the country, serving almost 4 million students, you're still seeing a lot of independent systems, still small ones across the country. So I don't think it's the goal in most cases that that charter operators are trying to replicate all of the different pieces that we're seeing in districts, because at some point, that's a reason why some are leaving the districts. They're just looking to do it differently. So not a perfect answer. I don't think everything is solved, but in some ways starting anew in cases and trying to figure out how to do things efficiently. And where they have scaled, really thinking through some of these difficult questions, but not solving anything just yet in 30 years. So, and then back to your first question, will you just repeat the... Yeah, I think so. In the short term, as the ESAs grows, I think that charter schools being, complete schools that operate on their own and where dollars flow automatically on a per pupil basis is still an efficient way to run schools. Over time, if the number of dollars that are available to students significantly grow and really are available, and it becomes easier for school leaders to figure out how to recruit students and have the dollars flow, it will be, I would imagine, it will be enticing for some to have that and operate outside some of the regulations that exist in a public school setting. I think that will be enticing to folks. I don't think that we're there yet in lots of places, even when the dollars are larger, like they're just starting to be in some states. Some parents and some communities, I think, are still going to want to have public schools that are run as public schools that have accountability in the way in which we're talking about for charter schools. So whether it's taking state assessments or additional types of things that we're seeing that states and districts, authorizers, in the ways in which they decide to regulate these schools, we are seeing some families, and I still think we will continue to see that, some families want that. So in the whole range of options that we're seeing for families from, sort of from district run down to micro schools and everything in the middle, and I'm not even sure those are really the bounds of education, but everything in the middle, I do still think that you're going to see lots of demand at every stage along the way, and the flexibility, some flexibility, not as much, in exchange for accountability is going to be enticing to parents and also legislators as well. I think that bargain will still continue to be interesting to a whole lot of folks.
Yeah, Superintendent Brewster.
Chris Brewster with Santa Fe South Schools in Oklahoma City. It's a real pleasure to hear you all speak. We know that our primary accountability is to the parent, and I hear that echoed in each of the ways that you speak. But the United States is built on one of the core concepts being an educated citizenry is healthy for us in all possible ways, from security to economic stability, family stability. With that in mind, what are the actual accountabilities that we have as school operators to the public, given that our first priority and loyalty is to the parent? How should we be held to account? Public institutions have one primary goal to educate the public, and that is in some ways measurable, but how should we be held accountable by the public at large for utilization of public taxpayer dollars for these purposes?
Do you want to start? Sorry, I get to start every time.
That's a tough question. So who's going to take that question on?
Well, speaking from the charter perspective here, I think that there's a couple different kinds of accountability that we're seeing. One is through the way in which you get a charter. You have to apply and you have to set up your scheme and say how all the ways in which you're going to serve students, the ways in which you're going to bring students in, the ways in which you're going to serve them, the ways in which you'll be measured. And that's the deal that you offer. And if the authorizer, which in many cases are either districts, which are elected bodies, or state organizing authorizers, they say, okay, we agree. So that's one mechanism in which you see accountability. Sort of the school says, this is how we're going to do it, and this is how we think we should be measured. And if this authorizing agency agrees, then they go ahead and have a chance to do that. The other mechanism is just parent choice. And parents are choosing to send their students to schools, and if those schools are not performing well, they have then the option, right? That's the underpinnings of all of this choice, the option to go other places or not go to charter schools. So, I look at some Geo Academies here, Kevin here in the front row. He's sending his students out of the door with high school diplomas and college diplomas. Like if he's not following through on the promise that he's making to his parents, and he is, then the parents are going to choose something else. So he's setting the bar incredibly high for himself when he's applying to be a charter, and he's following through, and the parents are saying, yes, we're going to send our students to the school, and they're being incredibly successful. So there's a couple different pieces in the charter world for how we're ensuring that there is accountability.
And it's a great question, Chris. I love it. I've never had that question asked before, but I guess and you're right. Parents, I mean, from the survey I talked about, parents aren't coming and clamoring for, hey, can you educate my kids so that I'm looking for a school that's going to educate my kids so my kid can be a positive participant in our democratic institutions. That's not what they're articulating. But I would say, in a very real way, the schools, whether they're district charter, microschools, innovative models, that are doing a good job on what is our fundamental charge, which is we have a set of things, skills, knowledge that we need kids to acquire. The schools that are doing a good job with that are equipping our kids to really be vital participants in our democratic institutions. Because what does that mean? It doesn't just mean they've memorized their times tables. Right? The really good schools have made sure our kids are critical thinkers. We don't have to worry as much about kids in those schools being wary, being skeptical about chatbots and AIs and hallucinations because they're already skeptical. They already investigate things. They've learned those skills. They have content knowledge about our history, about the history of the world. That helps them to make choices about policies and politics, and so that's the aspiration. It's not just an aspiration. Our schools that are doing a great job are doing that right now. I feel very, very good about this generation of kids that's coming from schools that are doing their basic fundamental job really well. Our problem is that's a minority of our schools. And so if we can focus on really good, solid academics, if we can focus on surrounding kids with adults who really care about them and their future, all the things we want to do, we can focus on preparing our kids to thrive in the workforce and do those things well, like the basic things. It may not be that the larger issue, Chris, you're talking about is going to take care of itself, but we'll be in so much better shape.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, I think my question is probably for Don, and it's not a challenge, I promise. I'm really curious to learn more. I'm from Arizona, and micro schools in Arizona are typically kids that have an empowerment scholarship account and exist completely outside the regulatory scheme. So when you share these facts about the income of families using micro schools and others, where are you getting that information from? That's my question, because in Arizona, if you're in a micro school, there's nobody tracking you. There's nobody, we don't collect income data or really any data for vouchers. So when I hear these broad claims about micro schools, my immediate question is, where are you getting that data?
Okay. The short answer to your question is our research comes from Microschool founders themselves, so that's who's providing this data set of 800 of them around the country. I will add for Arizona, and John Ward, who leads the ESA office, is a terrific leader under a lot of scrutiny and pressure and in touch. And he's been great. We've worked with him in some areas like currently, as you know, the ESA contract application and instructions are not available in Spanish anywhere. So we apparently there's some internal reasons. So we provided that to the department. Hopefully that's going online, which will allow them to serve families from lower income households. And then some other questions like how do you meet the state's residency requirements when the agency isn't prepared to accept for unsheltered families, there's a process to get an ID, and they weren't accepting those, or they're not accepting utility bills, which are required to show residency. But if you have a family that you're paying your utilities are part of your rent, or there's an Empower online system basically of debit cards, that they were not accepting those, so that families who were at the more vulnerable end of the income spectrum were unable to participate in the program?
But how would you know? I'm asking, sorry, my question is, where do you get the data, right? The department doesn't have the income data, so where are you getting the economic data, especially if you're going to talk about Arizona?
Yeah. So
and I don't mean it as a challenge.
Sure.
I'm truly curious where this information.
So in non-public schools, they don't have access to the same public records that public schools have. So we are relying on the Microschool founders, and not all of them answer the questions, but we had 60 microschools in Arizona participate in those. So it's coming from the founders.
Okay, so we do have 15 more minutes, so let's continue the discussion. Yes.
Hi, Kevin Teasley with Greater Education Opportunities Foundation. I'm very in favor of public school choice, microschools, charters. I actually have a private school and 7 charters. The question I have is, where is this conversation going? I think choice has won. School choice, everybody's supportive of it. The question now is, how are we all going to be held accountable? What measures, and I'm not suggesting that we need microschools to be held to the same standards, or am I suggesting charters should be held? I don't really know where this accountability discussion is going. There was a conversation this morning in the 74 about microschools, and I think it was Rand that did the study, and they couldn't find enough data to find out if microschools were successful. Every year we have conversations about charters in public. Heck, right now we're talking about NAEP and the miserable 12th grade scores. How are microschools going to improve those NAEP scores if we don't really know, or if they're not even testing? So it's just a big, broad question. I'm not advocating for more state testing. Maybe we should be looking at less state testing. I don't know where this is going. But if there's funding involved, I'm pretty sure legislators are all going to be asking, where's the beef? Who wants to take that
Sounds
one?
like a question for all 3 panelists. So who wants to take it up first?
I passed the buck last time, so and Superintendent Brewster, thank you for your question. I would accept that if we are going to accept taxpayer dollars, then to demonstrate proper stewardship, that some amount of accountability is appropriate, for sure. I would point to the Arkansas, for those that may be familiar with the Arkansas Education Freedom Accounts program. The Department of Education there allowed microschools, among other entities, to submit paperwork that says, this is my school, this is these are my qualifications, this is what success looks like in our school, and this is how we're going to measure that success, and that's how the Education Freedom Accounts program is going to track it. With our own microschool, we had to, as a city partner using municipal dollars, I had to promise contractually that our kids would demonstrate 125% of the longitudinal academic growth over time as the schools that our kids were coming from. And I have that background, so we were able to do that. So I think the answer can look differently. And then just lastly, what John Schweig at Rand really has said in the article this morning, which is great, is that the reason families choose microschools is so often contextual or place-based, and to use, they're using NWEA data, that the reason that you'll hear much more about this tomorrow, I'm not qualified to talk about their research, but there are real questions about the best ways to accomplish that, and I think we know it when we see it, and I think we can be thoughtful about what those accountability mechanisms look like.
I'd just say, great question. Obviously, fodder for, well, they turned my mic off. All right, I guess I'm cut off. Thank you. Thank you, Don. Now you get me in stereo. I would say, I don't know if this is provocative or not, important accountability around parent choice, no question about it. If we ever ignore that, we really lost our way. But that can't be the only accountability. I think back to Superintendent Chris's question, society has an interest in the education of our kids as well. If it didn't, we would get rid of compulsory education laws, right? We wouldn't require our kids to go. We would have no oversight at all of our religious schools, but we do. It's different. It looks different than the oversight of charters and the oversight of district schools, but there is oversight. There are some things, and so I guess I would say, Kevin, to end on a slightly optimistic note, we shouldn't think of the models we have now as static. So yes, test scores I am old enough to remember when we tested kids once every set of grades, and it was very, very easy to sweep the bad news under the carpet. So I'm a big believer we have to have data on learning and growth from kids, every grade, every kid. Doesn't have to look like what it looks like now. Part of what we should all be spending our time on is innovating in how we assess student mastery and student growth. So maybe as we are now trying to figure out accountability across choice and across innovative models, that will spur us to come up with better systems that translate better across different models for how we assess student learning. And the last thing, which, you know, Kevin, I know you will appreciate, we're supposed to be the drivers of economic mobility. We are supposed to be the drivers of the American dream. In most cases, and New York City is one of these, we do not even track how our kids do in our economy after they leave us. We don't even know. That's got to be part of the accountability.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, Keith Jacobs. I am from Florida. So, I got some groans on that one. Oh, Florida. So, you know, building on what you just said, Daniel, about innovation. So in Florida, as you know, over 500,000 students have eligible ESAs. So when we talk about innovation, we look at innovation more from a supplier perspective, where you have charter schools, microschools, home education programs, virtual programs, all in this unique market space, offering programs to offer programs for families. So with the next phase of public education being that the families are the guarantors or the drivers of their child's educational learning experience. I think it's Eric. What advice have you been giving charter schools as the model or the funding mechanism for supplying for a charter school is slowly changing, because families are now that have ESAs in Florida now have an option of purchasing said programs from charter schools on a part-time basis, and no longer the full-time model that we've been so used to for decades. So what advice are you giving families as this model is changing and it's trending in the direction of more families are going to take advantage of it? And when you're working with microschool coalitions that Don runs and oversees, how are you all collaborating to ensure that families are the drivers in having that educational choice experience?
Yeah, it's a good question. And what we are studying and looking to see, like in Florida, which is a leader in this, is looking to see, like, as these choice options come online in other places, are there ways in which charter schools can participate, either providing a portion of education for families, or, you know, students can come for some period of time to participate in the charter school. So it's new. And we haven't seen a lot of progress across the country just yet, because so many of these programs are new, but it's something that we're taking a look at to see, sort of, as these programs are developed and as the regulations are fleshed out, are there ways in which parents can participate in these programs with charter schools, and charter schools can participate for some portion of education for families as well, because if they're doing something well and they have the ability and the capacity to serve students for some portion of education before, after school, during school, or some certain subjects or otherwise, that they are a part of that. Because I think you're right, it's dynamic, and you know, there's so many of these individuals that just want to provide high quality education to students however they come in the door, and charter schools can be a part of that, but it's early in figuring out sort of what that looks like. Because I don't think that we know exactly everywhere sort of how that's all going to work, how you could divide up the day, because charter schools will still have accountability built in for students. So thinking about, like, how do they measure students when they're in the door? Who does take those tests? What does it look like? Who's accountable for what needs to be figured out? So we're trying to work with folks to encourage them to figure that out and figure those types of things out so that it can be more dynamic than it is right now.
Hi, thank you. I have kind of a two-part question. The comment about looking at the way that we hold schools accountable on assessments is interesting. I'm working on a bill in Utah to help charter schools innovate more. The whole reason we have charters is to innovate, and yet we often, as states, hold them in the same kind of strictures that we hold public schools in. And so I am starting a pilot to allow some charters to opt out of the state adaptive test, and we're going to ask for a waiver from the federal government. We've already had conversations with the DOE. Anyway, long story short, we're just going to allow some charters to use norm-referenced tests instead, which I think will help them as they are designing curriculum and classroom activities to just have more flexibility rather than spending weeks preparing students for the adaptive test. The other question, though, that I had, so as we're looking at expanding charter schools in Utah, we have had about the same number historically over time, and we're having a very difficult time getting authorizers to actually authorize new charter schools in the state. And just wondering if you could speak to, I mean, there's a lot of pressure against authorizing. We've run bills to create, higher ed can be authorizers, and it's just not creating any more charters, though I know that there are applicants. So how do you kind of get over that hurdle?
So on the first thing, I as you move forward, I hope you'll stay in touch so that we can learn from what you're doing in Utah. And I think that the push has to come from advocacy of families and schools themselves. I'm not quite sure what the other mechanisms are for really putting, sort of pressure if the families aren't, speaking out themselves, and we just see that sort of in place after place. That's what's driving the further growth of charter schools. And I suspect that some of the push that you're going for is coming from families, but just the sort of further involvement and raising their voices so that the authorizers, whether it's the districts that are authorizing or otherwise, know that that's actually what's what the parents want. That's where we see that growth is happening in lots of places.
Right here in the middle. I don't know if we have a microphone nearby, though. Okay, here comes Drew.
Hello, my name is Nandini Menon, and I founded a private school 22 years back, kind of coming from a totally different viewpoint from all of you. And my ask to all of you is, we're looking at everything from the student perspective, but it's a teaching, learning paradigm. And what have we done in terms of at least ensuring that every teacher in our system has a uniform understanding of visible learning outcomes so that we have that intersection of teaching and learning. So irrespective of what form of school we have that North Star that we're all going towards that. And I am proud to say it started at 22 years back, coming from a different culture, but going to school here. My kids have been in the top 20% of the nation for the last 18 years, just because we invest a lot in teacher PD to make sure they understand what visible learning outcomes look. So it's to all three of you and asking, isn't that an important part of this puzzle?
Let me just comment on that question. I think this is sort of something we talked about in my class today with Dan, and there's a new focus in education on, okay, how should we teach reading? How should we teach math? Is there a set of, do we know anything about pedagogical approaches that can inform any school, whether it's charter or whether it's a micro school or whether it's a traditional district school? So let me ask the panelists, do we have an agreement on pedagogy, if not on organization?
Well, I wouldn't say we have agreement, and back to the point from our friend from Utah. I mean, charters. I know that we count on them to innovate and be cutting edge and to learn from them. But I would say, Paul, and we did have a great discussion with your students today. When you're operating at scale, and so you have less ability to have that high touch with each individual educator, you have to figure out teaching and learning strategies that will work at scale. You have to be able to bring the floor up so you can look parents in the eye, back to parents, and say, If you send your child to the school down the street, or you send your child to a magnet school, you send your child somewhere else, they are at a minimum going to get a good, solid academic grounding. We can't say that right now in New York City or in most districts. And the key to being able to say that, I think, is to have, I think, what you're pointing to. Everybody having a good core curriculum that they're working off of, that they get to know really well, and really good support on how you effectively teach and differentiate, really importantly differentiate, off of that core curriculum from somebody who's done it. So somebody who really knows the materials, understands the scope and sequence, understands how kids articulate to the next grade, et cetera. So, I'll just speaking for me, at scale, you have to have those systemic. It just doesn't work, as we tried for decades in New York City, to let everybody pick their own adventure. That does not work.
There are 250,000 teachers in charter schools across the country. Charter schools are schools of choice for teachers as well. So focus on teaching is critical, and that the teachers are choosing the school and they are supported in their school. And we see in places where teachers don't feel supported, the schools aren't able to operate successfully, and the students are not learning. So absolutely, even though we've been talking, about maybe high, lever policy questions, of course, what's going on in the buildings is absolutely critical. And and we do know that the teacher is, an absolutely fundamental part of how students are learning and how they'll be successful. And if we can't keep our teachers satisfied, happy, they'll turn over, and it's impossible to run a school that way. So it's important in the charter world too. And so, like I said, we remind ourselves that these are schools of choice for teachers as well. They have to find the school. They have to choose to come, and they know it's going to be different, and they're going to make a career choice to join.
Our youngest attends a micro middle school only, founded by a husband and wife, accomplished licensed administrators in the charter school system who had never set foot in a private school before they started their own. And they draw the point that if we look at the pattern of research based on exit interviews, why experienced educators have left the classroom, so often the pattern is that their input as a professional was not for consequence, it was not taken seriously, which is cultural, which is management. And these questions are ultimately solvable by management culture.
Okay, I think that's now is officially the end of the session. Thank you very much to the panelists. We've got about a 15-minute break, and then the next session starts.